Hey guys, what's going on? This is Andrew here today, and we're going to be talking about a theory that I've had for quite a few years now, and that's about why I believe Nintendo finally stopped making a handheld variant and a home console variant each generation. I've put a lot of thought into this, and I felt that now would be a good time to put it into words. This theory I'm going to be talking about involves the history of Nintendo and a look at some of the main differences between their handheld and console variants. Taking a look at the Game Boy, this was a system that was a major experiment for the company, as this was their first handheld system outside of the Game & Watch. It was an 8-bit system, so it had similar capabilities to what the NES did, and it had a 160 by 144 display without a backlight. Compare this to an NES, and they really weren't too different spec-wise. Skip a few years down the line, and the SNES, which was a 16-bit system, launched, which became their main focus in the home console market. Some years later, the Nintendo 64 launched, which was 64 bits, and yet at the same time, the Game Boy as an 8-bit system was still their main primary system for handheld that did not see an update until the Game Boy Color in 1998. So what kept the system selling? Well, for example, Pokemon Red and Blue just launched in 1996, and those games started a legacy of one of the biggest franchises as of today, as well as being the second best-selling games on that platform itself. I also believe that the gimmick of it being simply a handheld kept it alive, and aiming it much towards kids that saw this as a very new thing. Unfortunately, this wouldn't fly nowadays, as kids are basically born into smartphones, so they're already used to that technology, and the biggest games around are multiplayer shooters rather than typical Mario games that came before. Younger kids are always attached to what older kids are playing, and the older kids are simply playing the multiplayer type games. A great example is when I got my brother a Wii U for his 9th birthday a few years back. I ended up playing it more than him because he was more interested in my copy of Black Ops 2. I've gone on a tangent, so let's get back into the discussion of the Game Boy Color. Here's the thing. It was an 8-bit system. So here we are with 64 bits as the next step in the console market, only a year away from the launch of the Dreamcast and only 2 years away from the PS2, and Nintendo was still only on 8 bits for their handheld. This is 1998 we're talking about. These were some interesting times because that meant that Nintendo had two very different systems, which meant that there was a reason to have both, as you had two different sets of content across both platforms. This was a similar pattern that we've seen for quite a long time. Even the GBA was only a 32-bit system, while the GameCube was a very well-established 3D system alongside the PS2 and OG Xbox. But after the GameCube and Nintendo 64 were seen as failures to Nintendo, something changed. Nintendo for years had seen themselves as the competitor of these systems, but I think that they finally realized that they lost their spotlight once the 360 came out, and they had to do some experimenting to win the consumer back. This is when Nintendo launched the Wii, which I consider the downfall of Nintendo focusing on high visuals and hardware, and quite possibly the start of the reason that we have a hybrid console today. The console was aimed at the more casual consumer market and focused on much more family-friendly games. They figured since devs already knew the GameCube inside and out, that it would be a good idea to basically just reuse the hardware instead of stepping up their hardware for the updated visuals that you would see on the next-gen consoles at the time, the 360 and the PS3. This was not only a system that they launched that was a major innovation though, as they also launched the DS, a dual-screen system with a touchscreen that was utilized to have a game for all types of audiences. There's Pokemon for the kids, Call of Duty for the teenagers and adults, and Cookie Mama for those casual parents and grandparents. So automatically, these systems both had something in common, and that they were both ready for any audience out there. Here's the thing though, the systems had just enough differences between them to justify others to feel like they needed both. The DS was a touchscreen handheld with a D-pad that was capable of Nintendo 64 type games, plus some other 2D big games, while the Wii was a motion control based system that was the current gen home console at the time, getting a decent amount of the current games, while also having backwards compatibility on the GameCube on certain models. So what changed for the next generation after all this? Let's get back into what I was talking about before about Nintendo reusing old hardware for the Wii. By doing that, it caused them to be behind in the graphics department compared to the competition, but what they didn't put into mind is that they didn't do the same thing for the transition of the GBA to the DS. At this point, their current handheld power was less than a generation of power away from their home console's capabilities. By holding back their home console, they allowed for their handheld consoles to catch up just enough to where it was just as capable as playing the same types of games, and that's where the 3DS and Wii U come into play now. So let's take a look right now, back at the GBA and the GameCube. The GBA was about 2 console generations behind the GameCube in terms of power. Since they reused that GameCube hardware in the next generation, now the DS was only 1 generation of power behind the Wii. So at this point, considering the GameCube was around the time that games started becoming much more capable 3D games rather than the clunkiness they were on the generation before, you started seeing a lot more games being able to be played the same way, just with slightly upped visuals. So let's talk about the 3DS and the Wii U. The Wii U was just slightly more powerful than the Xbox 360 and PS3 in terms of GPU power, while the 3DS was slightly less capable than the GameCube. So what happened the generation during the 360 and PS3? The devs making the 360 and PS3 games only had to cut down the visuals to get the same exact playing experience on the Wii. So basically, the Wii was a GameCube. It was basically a whole generation behind the 360 and PS3 in terms of visuals, and that gap in hardware was about the same as the gap between the 3DS and the Wii U. That now meant that these systems were as capable of playing the same types of games as each other, and not everyone felt like they needed to get both. Sure, the diehard fans, or just diehard fans in general, will always go for whatever comes out, but the hardcore gamer isn't where the majority of sales always come from. Let's take a look at a few games that are some key examples. On the 3DS, we saw Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask remakes. On the Wii U, we saw Wind Waker and Skyward Sword remakes. Right there, those are 4 Zelda remakes, meaning games that were launched on prior systems, but remastered or reimagined on new, more powerful hardware, but only this time, there were 2 new powerful sets of hardware. Next, we have Animal Crossing New Leaf on the 3DS and Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival on the Wii U. 2 Animal Crossing games, with one being the definitive edition, but yet they were both Animal Crossing games that were in 3D. My next example is Super Mario 3D World on the Wii U and 3D Land on the 3DS. Both 3D Mario games that looked and played pretty similarly on both platforms. My last and favorite example to point out on just how similar things started to become on both platforms are Smash Bros. Wii U and Smash Bros. 3DS, 2 bland-ass Smash games that you're able to play across both platforms on the TV screen, so you can use your 3DS to play with someone who's playing it on the Wii U. At this point, I think my idea I'm trying to express is clear. Things were just too similar now. Nintendo was focusing too hard on bringing games to both platforms, I should say, and each game that they brought was a very quality game, but you ended up needing both systems to get all the quality games. I don't know about you guys, but if there was a handheld console that played similar quality games to the one of the home console, I would opt for the handheld, and I think the sales for both systems speak for themselves on what others thought as well. I can confidently say that these systems were holding each other back, considering that the 3DS and the Wii U together didn't even amount to the sales that the Wii did. Just imagine if the 3DS was the only system that they launched last generation, getting all those Zelda remakes, some solid Mario titles, Splatoon, the very first main series 3D Pokemon game, and a definitive Smash game, and even potentially Breath of the Wild could have made the system get into the 100 million mark, just like the DS, which is actually at 154 million, and the Wii did. The reason why the prior systems and consoles sold very well separately is because they had that many differences to justify buying both, but as things got more similar based on games I just listed, you didn't need to have both the 3DS and the Wii U to have crazy different experiences. They basically were the same type of experience, and they both were very well established 3D systems. I think that the Nintendo Switch is the best decision that Nintendo has made, and I think that is something that they should have done a long time ago. Ever since the Game Boy, all of Nintendo's handheld consoles have sold extremely well, while their home consoles have always had that hit or miss effect. Combining their knowledge on 35 years of being in the console market while consistently being at the top in the handheld market definitely helped them make such a great system. Trust me. I still disagree with Nintendo for a lot of things they did during the Switch, but I think that they have finally come to their senses to realize that on-the-go hardware is becoming much less of a task to develop, and it isn't that far off for what we are seeing on their home consoles today. I mean, there are people who are playing Cyberpunk on their Aya Neo right now, and a majority of people can't even run those games on their gaming PCs. Having both set of games from their handheld line and home console line make for an incredible console with incredible potential, and I'm hoping that they continue this outlook from this point forward, as they seem to know what they're doing this time around. Anyway, guys, that's how I view the logic on how Nintendo went into the Switch. I could be completely off, but honestly, that's my take, and that's just how I saw it from my eyes go down. Thank you all for watching this video. I will see you all in the next one.